Hello, my name is Jim Wade, and I'm a tax attorney here in Maine, and welcome to my discussion on innocent spouse relief. Today we're going to be talking about what is it? So without further ado, let's get started. So what is innocent spouse relief? Well, before we talk about that, let's talk about what is the sort of reason for having innocent spouse relief, and that is joint liability. When you and your spouse file a return together, you are agreeing to both be liable on the taxes due, regardless of whose income the taxes are being paid on. So if you and your husband both earn income, you're agreeing to be liable for his debt, and he's agreeing to be liable on your debt. Now, what innocent spouse relief does is it severs that joint liability, sometimes in whole, sometimes in part. We're going to talk about that more when we discuss the three different types of relief. Just be aware, innocent spouse relief is for situations where it would be unfair to hold you liable for the tax debts of another. So why do we need innocent spouse relief? Well, as I said earlier, filing a joint return makes you both liable for unpaid taxes, whether it be yours or the spouse's. And that is also regardless of who is the blameworthy party. Often a situation comes up where you have a self-employed spouse who isn't making their estimated tax payments, and at the end of the year, when a return is filed, you're both on the hook for his tax debt. Oftentimes I assume most people who are listening to this are the one that's the aggrieved party. You are paid a wage, you make sure you have enough withheld, you cover your tax debt, but the other party does not. Well, guess what? The IRS can come after you just as much as the other spouse to get these taxes paid. Often the case is, if you're the wage earner, the IRS is going to go with you first because you have a consistent source of income that can be easily attached to make payment on the tax debt. So as I said, doesn't matter, the IRS doesn't have to concern itself with who earned the income or whose fault it is that there's unpaid taxes. Now, innocent spouse relief really is used to prevent these inequitable results. Let's say there's a joint tax debt, one spouse dies, and now you're on the hook for the taxes completely. The other spouse may not have assets to pay it, or there may be some other reasons why the death robs you of the ability to pay the full tax bill. There's also the more common occurrence, which is divorce or separation, where you are no longer living with this person, and now you are on the hook for all of the tax debt due, even though you no longer are in that family partnership where you can both use your income to pay these taxes. Now, often you've gone through a huge amount of financial disruption. You may now have to take care of children. You may not have the resources you once did to pay the tax debt. Innocent spouse relief is there to help you. You've also got situations where returns are filed without consent, meaning you're unaware that the other party has filed a return on your behalf without you knowing what's on the tax return. Innocent spouse relief may be there to provide relief. So let's start with, before we get into in later episodes about what innocent spouse does and how it works, let's just talk real quickly about how to avoid joint liability altogether. There is no requirement that you file a joint return with your spouse. You can file separately, and you may want to do so in cases where, let's say your spouse is self-employed and they're not paying enough taxes to cover the debt, or you suspect that they may not be telling the full truth when they file a return. You do not want to file a joint return in those circumstances. Now, if you do, however, find yourself in a situation where you're on the hook with a spouse, you can use the innocent spouse relief to sever that liability. But just be aware, if you're going into a divorce situation and you are having a judgment or some other settlement where you're allocating the tax debt in divorce, that does not bind the IRS. The IRS can still come after you for both of your tax debts. And we'll talk about what innocent spouse does to resolve this issue. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have a divorce judgment which allocates the debt, because that can be helpful in showing you shouldn't be held responsible for it, but it doesn't mean that automatically you no longer owe for your spouse's tax debt. If all else fails, if you can't file a separate return, a joint return has been filed, and you're on the hook for all of it, you still have an opportunity to work out some sort of payment plan with the IRS or other resolution, including that IRS tax debt settlement you hear about on the radio ads. All right. With that, if you've got any questions, give me a call or email me. My contact information is below. It was a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to our next episode.